So, accessibility in presentations. Let's talk about that. A super common question people ask me is, hey, Echo, how do I balance creating a visually engaging presentation with creating an accessible one? Sometimes people are more specific and ask for help with making a PowerPoint file work for screen readers and 508 compliance. Either way, a lot of people are asking about accessibility in the context of academic or research presentations. And you saw the title of this video, so I'm guessing you could use a little help too. So welcome to More Than PowerPoint. I'm Dr. Echo Rivera, and I help academics and researchers and those who went the non-academic path learn how to create visually engaging presentations. And people in this space who have to share educational information and teach and share data, well, we often have to care about things like accessibility. And I am a presentation trainer. I have an online professional development program called the Presentation Skills Masterclass Series, and it's a super fun way to learn how to make engaging presentations. And I've been helping people create both more visually engaging and more accessible presentations through my training for years. So it's a common question that has come up over the years. So I've done a lot of work in this area and finally am releasing a YouTube video about it. Now, accessibility is a complex and nuanced topic, so please keep in mind that this is a relatively short video, and I can't say everything there is to say in one video. So I will be making follow-up videos. This is a series, and I'll be posting resources in the description to complement my videos. But still, this will not end up being an exhaustive documentary about everything there is to know about accessibility. And most importantly, what you should know is that this series is specifically about slide presentations. So lectures or course videos that have slides, or conference presentations, webinars, that type of thing, where you are using slide software like PowerPoint or whatever, and have visual complements to your verbal speech. So I just want to be really clear about that up front. Okay, so back to the question at hand. Now, this is actually a difficult question to answer because it's actually the wrong question to ask. So what I want to do is pick away at some of the assumptions embedded in that question, and then you'll start to see why it's the wrong question to ask. There are three big assumptions embedded in this question. One, the status quo or text-heavy presentations are currently accessible. Two, visually engaging presentations are not accessible. And three, you have to choose between visual or accessible, or at least balance the two. Now, you might be like, no, I've never made those assumptions before. What are you talking about? But if you asked any form of this original question, then you are making these assumptions. Let's visualize it. Again, the question is, how do we balance visually engaging with accessibility? That means you're viewing them on opposite ends because you don't really balance things that are on the same side, right? So this is how it would look. They're on opposite ends. And kind of like a seesaw, as one goes up, the other goes down. So the more visually engaging a presentation is, the less accessible it is, and vice versa. And then again, the question that people ask is, how do we balance the two? How do we get them on the same level? How do we get the seesaw to be even? And the only people who really ask this question are those who are equating the text-heavy status quo style presentations with accessibility. That's when this question comes up. When people are told or they're learning that they should not use so much text in their presentation, and they're trying to use more visuals, or they're told they should use more visuals, something comes along and makes them wonder, wait, but if I do that, if I use more visuals and less text, What if I lose the accessibility I have right now? So really, they're putting text at the opposite end of visual, but talking about it in the context of accessibility. So that's what's happening here. Accessibility is getting equated with the text-heavy slides known as the status quo. And people will say the same kind of idea in different ways. So another way I've heard this as a reason for having text-heavy status quo presentations is people will defend it by saying, yeah, it's not super visual, but at least it's accessible. Or, yeah, I know it looks a little boring, but at least it's accessible, right? So the only way to really question if a visual presentation is accessible is if there's something holding you back, and if there is an assumption that the text-heavy status quo is currently accessible. That's why in this video, we are going to do a deep dive on this first assumption to see if it is actually true. Are the status quo presentations currently accessible? Spoiler! It's not true. The status quo style of presenting is actually antithetical to accessibility. Whoa, big statement. I know, but you know what? There's the video. The status quo is not accessible. This assumption is not met. See you in the next video. Just kidding. Let's walk through step by step so you can fully understand why the status quo is so inaccessible. To begin with, let's make sure we understand disability in a very broad, general way. This is the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, and here's how they define disability. The CDC says a disability is any condition of the body or mind, impairment, that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities, activity limitation, and interact with the world around them, participation restrictions. Okay, so body or mind, got it. What else? Let's keep going and learn just a little bit more before we move on. The CDC also says there are many types of disabilities, such as those that affect a person's vision, movement, thinking, remembering, learning, communicating, hearing, mental health, and social relationships. Okay, got it. Multiple types of disabilities. Now, there's an interesting point in this last paragraph. The CDC says, although, quote, people with disabilities, end quote, sometimes refers to a single population, this is actually a diverse group of people with a wide range of needs. Okay, this is what I was getting us to. There are many types of disabilities, and with that come a very diverse range of needs. And we also know that people can have more than one disability at a time, right? It sounds obvious when I say it, but a lot of people forget that in a presentation context, so it's worth stating out loud. All right, that's puzzle piece number one, so to speak. Now, let's set the foundation of what is the status quo or text-heavy style of presentations. Well, as a presentation trainer who has professional development for presentations, I've been spending years working with academics and researchers to help improve their presentations, which means I've seen a lot. Plus, I have a PhD, which means I've sat through a lot of lectures and conference presentations. And there is a clear pattern across all of these slides that tell us what the status quo is. So here's the status quo style if I were to reverse engineer it. First, we have walls and walls of text read to the audience. We have poor contrast throughout the slides, bad template designs, or things like rainbow slides that are painful to look at because of all the different colors. Everything is tiny, like so tiny. The default font size in PowerPoint is too small, and a lot of people use that, or worse, a smaller font size. And text is important. A visually engaging presentation still has text, but academics and researchers use text to describe things when a visual would be so much better and so much faster and even easier to present. So text is way overused in the status quo. Or then if there are visuals, it's like all the wrong choices. The visual itself is kind of like a waste of space on the slide. Or it's smart art, which you should not be using. Or maybe it's actually a good visual, but it's formatted so incorrectly that it again turns out to be just a waste of space. Academic and research presentations love having tables and tables of data. You should not be using tables in a presentation if you want it to be accessible. Status quo presentations have lots of overwhelming, confusing data visualizations. Academics and researchers, we share lots of data, but unfortunately, it's usually very confusing and overwhelming and makes people disengage the second they see it, before you even have a chance to explain your data. And just in general, there's just too much information all at once. There's not a lot of adjustments for things like cognitive overload. There's very little spacing the information across multiple slides or connecting it to each other. So yeah, that's the status quo. And honestly, I just kind of ran out of space. I could keep going about all the problems with the status quo, but I talk about those problems in a lot of other videos, so we can move on. Hey, it's me, Dr. Echo Rivera, and I just wanted to pop in and say, if you're starting to realize, that sounds like what I do, no worries, you do not need to feel bad. I have your back, and I am here to help you create accessible presentations and to help you stop doing the status quo. In my professional development program, the Presentation Skills Masterclass series, you will learn how to stop doing the status quo and how to create visually engaging, effective, accessible presentations. Accessibility is just part of what I teach. It's embedded in all of my strategies. And if you're interested, make sure you check out the link below. Okay, let's continue with the video. Let's go back to our seesaw real quick. So again, the people who are questioning how to balance visual presentations with accessibility are really questioning whether they should change these status quo presentations into something different. So now that we have defined the status quo and we are hopefully on the same page about how there are multiple disabilities, let's go through and do a thought exercise about how well this style of presenting works for the 4 most applicable disabilities for the type of presentations that academics and researchers do. So I'm going to focus on vision disabilities, hearing disabilities, learning disabilities, and mental health challenges. So first, people sometimes forget that some people just have vision problems and aren't totally blind. And the status quo presentations, like I said, are way too small for people with vision problems. The text is too small, the visuals are too small, and the visuals often have too much detail in the wrong ways, so they're actually not great for processing information quickly. I've seen a lot of really bad contrast used. I see text on top of a photo where you can't actually read the text. Like even I struggled to read that. Or I've seen people use screenshots, like very blurry screenshots of tables and graphs taken from a journal article or a website or output generated from another app, right? Things like that. So even people without vision problems would struggle with that. So people with vision problems definitely struggle with that. And that's why the status quo is not accessible for that. So what about people who are deaf or hard of hearing? Well, a lot of people think that just because there's text on the slide, that somehow it is now accessible. So we're going to keep talking about this because there is some nuance here, but in very broad strokes, the slides themselves have an overwhelming amount of text, which again is really tiny and hard to read. So if you're relying on making people read the presentation, it's actually going to be really hard to keep up with the presenter, and it's going to activate cognitive overload for everyone. And in contrast, visuals, if they're good visuals, they're actually much easier and faster to process, especially in combination with minimal keywords and other supportive strategies like huge text. So I have not seen anyone make a convincing case that their text-heavy presentation with tiny text is better for people who are deaf or hard of hearing versus ones that use helpful, effective visuals. So no, I would say that the status quo does not work for this disability group. What about difficulties with thinking, remembering, and learning? Oh boy. Without question, these slides are the worst, literally the worst for anyone who has trouble with this. If you have ADHD or you're not neurotypical and you have to watch a status quo style presentation, it's so overwhelming. It's so confusing. It is impossible to follow and keep up. Seeing a wall of text or a horrible graph is like instant motivation killer. And that's when people often have to disengage just to cope with being there. So I would say the status quo is particularly horrible for people who are struggling with thinking, remembering, and learning. This is a hill I will die on. I will fight you on this, okay? Now, earlier I said I was talking about slide presentations across a variety of contexts. So I just want to make sure that just because I said the word learning disability does not mean this is exclusive to students in your classroom. So it's really important to remember that learning disabilities are everywhere. So your peers and colleagues at that conference, they have them. The policymakers you're presenting to, they have them. If you present to the public, they have them. So you need to care about this for every audience. And finally, there are people who are really struggling with their mental health, anxiety, depression, and so on. And how many reports do we have about student mental health being like the worst ever of all time? So clearly, this is something to care about if you're teaching right now. But even beyond that, just in general, like we're not doing so great in a lot of ways in terms of mental health. So it's really important that you assume you have people coming into your presentation who are struggling. They're depressed or anxious, or they have PTSD or complex PTSD. And everyone is different in terms of how this impacts them. Same for all of these disabilities. But it's like, how could the status quo possibly be helpful for something like anxiety or something like depression, where, maybe that day it feels like their brain is trying to drag itself through the mud, and it took all their effort that day just to put some clothes on and get themselves to your presentation. And then they see slides like the status quo. They know they're just not going to have it in them today because they know it's a wall of text that's just going to be read to them, and they know there's no point on watching the presenter just read the slides to them. It's not going to make sense anyway, or it's just going to take too much effort to try to process that overwhelming data dump in real time. So they know, and they're right, that they're probably better off just disengaging and reading your handout in their own time later. So that's just, like one example of many I can think of. But in general, I don't see how the status quo could be good for anybody struggling with their mental health. And it's not even just the slide design that is inaccessible. Bad speaker habits create inaccessible presentations too. Let's go through 3 examples of the worst speaker habits that do this, that make a presentation inaccessible. I don't know about you, but I've lost count over how many times a speaker had a glaring mismatch between what they said versus what was on their slide. So their slides are showing one thing, but they're saying something like really different. Tell me, how is that supposed to be accessible if someone can't hear you because they are deaf or have hearing problems? And this happens for a lot of reasons. Maybe the presenter just goes on a tangent, or maybe they do things like pull up a giant wall of text, realize they're running out of time or that they don't actually remember what they wanted to say, and then they say something like, "Oh, that's a lot of text. I'm not going to read that to you. You can read that for yourself." Oh, I have heard this exact sentence so many times. So tell me, How does that help someone who cannot see? Tell me how that works because I just don't get it. And then that also just sent everybody else who maybe has another disability we've talked about into a panic. Does somebody have vision problems and the slides are too small to read? Now they have to struggle and squint and strain just to see the tiny text while also having to listen to you say a bunch of other stuff. And for all the people who have trouble with thinking, remembering, or learning, they were already struggling with cognitive overload as it was and trying to keep up. And now it's going to be even worse because they almost have to use half of their brain to just copy everything down that they see on the slide and then use the other half of their brain to try to listen to you. I mean, that's so stressful. And then the one that really grinds my gears is when the speaker starts realizing, oh, I've just been reading all of my slides. I have a lot more left. I'm running out of time. And they just start skipping through their slides and it's chaos. And there is no way that is accessible for anyone. So this bad speaker habit of having a glaring mismatch between the slide content and the verbal speech, I'm just going to go ahead and shortcut this and say that's bad for everybody who has a disability. It's not accessible for anyone. Moving on to the second bad habit. So this one is that a lot of presenters don't ever storyboard, script, or practice their presentations effectively. And I get it. Storyboarding is hard, and it's usually one of the most time-consuming parts of creating a presentation. I'll be honest, the storyboard for this video and this video series was a huge struggle and took me a really long time because it was just really difficult to figure out how to put this all together. It's a really nuanced topic. What do I leave in? What do I leave out? And for a variety of reasons that are beyond the scope of this video, a lot of academics and researchers don't really do this effectively. Mostly because we don't have good examples of this and we just repeat the status quo, which is usually we try to do it, but then we just kind of give up because it's really hard and we don't know how to do it. And so we just share all the data and all the facts that we can. And it's usually very disorganized and confusing because it's just a data dump. It's just fact after fact after fact, slide after slide after slide of stuff. And there's not a lot where we're connecting the topics together in an effective way. We're not helping the audience categorize all this information and organize it. So how is that accessible for these 4 disability categories? Well, let's think this through. If somebody has vision difficulties or if somebody is blind, think about it. That means that if they're there in the moment, they're relying on your script. They're relying on the verbal part. So if you haven't scripted it and have not carefully put together a clear, organized story that can essentially work as a podcast, well, that's not good for people who have vision difficulties or are blind. Just listening to it sounds really confusing and hard to do. I also don't see how that would be good for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. I mean, if you aren't leading people from one slide to the next, and each slide is almost like a whole new thing, and they're starting over with each slide, it's not building on the last slide, well, then that means it's going to take extra time to catch up and be like, wait, what is this? That seems very difficult. And once again, I would say this is particularly horrible for anybody who has a disability with thinking, remembering, or learning. Because when we script and practice effectively, we catch the missing transitions between topics. We realize, oh wait, I never connected the dots between these concepts. That's also when we start seeing where visuals can help. Okay, these are all incredibly helpful for people in this category. And finally, I'm just not seeing how a confusing presentation with things like missing transitions that's scattered all over the place would be helpful for someone who is struggling with their mental health. Because remember, the argument people make is that the status quo is accessible. I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing how a confusing, disorganized data dump would be accessible for anyone. And the last bad habit, the final nail in the coffin, is that most presenters will take their death by PowerPoint slides and just use that 3 slides per page handout option in PowerPoint. And that is what people are supposed to use to take notes during the presentation and use as a reference for later on. Except we all have experienced how useless those handouts really are, especially when it's a status quo style presentation. I have a whole extended video on this. So if you were like, that's not true, or what do you mean by that? I just encourage you to watch that other video. I go into detail and you'll see what I mean after that video. So not having a handout or creating a handout that is useless as a reference for later on, that is the status quo. So again, how would that help someone who has vision problems? If they're already struggling to see your slides, the handout is going to be even harder to see because it's just like really tiny text. So that means they can't easily see either your slides or the handout. Also, as far as I know, and I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure screen readers cannot read those PDF handouts. So that doesn't sound accessible for vision disabilities to me. And honestly, the handouts are so bad, especially in combination with the status quo style of slide design, that there's just no way they're accessible for anyone with any of the other disabilities. Because again, it's just a tiny version of an ineffective, inaccessible presentation. So of course, it's not going to help. And here's another example. So let's say someone is struggling with their mental health that day, or a movement disability, which isn't here right now, but it was part of that original list, right? So either way, they can't come to your presentation because they're struggling. Well, the handout should be a lifeline for them so that they can catch up on what they missed. But when it's just a tiny version of an ineffective, inaccessible slide deck, that's not going to work as the lifeline they need. So putting all of that together, I really don't understand how anyone could possibly continue to think that the status quo is accessible, because it's like really, really inaccessible. The slide design itself is inaccessible. The storyboard or how the information is organized is inaccessible. The way it's delivered is inaccessible. And the supplemental handout is inaccessible. So look, this is your official wake-up call. And I know this might feel like a giant slap in the face because I know a lot of people think their slides are well-designed and accessible when they are in fact not. So I know this might be really hard to hear, and you might already be trying to justify why your slides look the way they do so you don't have to change. Please try to not let that happen. You started watching this video for a reason, and I would like to think it's because you do care and you want to do better. And it is so important to understand the negative impact of the status quo. That way you can internalize it and never go back. And I am not making this video to shame or judge anyone. This is hard. We are not taught how to do these things. And so many of us in this academic and research and non-academic space are completely overworked and underpaid and burnt out. So I am not judging you. Because yeah, I'm telling you from the bottom of my soul here, the status quo style presentations are really inaccessible. And by now you might be asking, okay, yeah, but like what evidence do you have, Echo? Like I need more evidence. And okay, all right, I'll show you some evidence next. No problem. I also want to very gently and politely ask you the same question too. What evidence do you have that a presentation can be boring yet accessible at the same time? What evidence is there that the status quo, death by PowerPoint, is accessible? This isn't to be combative, I promise. It's just about making sure we are all always checking our assumptions, right? It's just a reflection question. Is it because you just thought it? Is it because it's the status quo? Is it because your coworker or supervisor did it this way and told you it's accessible, right? Just because it's the status quo, you You know, deep down, that is not evidence. In fact, if you're in any type of justice, equity, or diversity space, which you probably are if you're watching a video like this, you very much know that what the status quo is usually wrong and oppressive. So why would this be different? So what's the evidence? Have you had somebody with a disability, multiple people with disabilities tell you that they appreciated your text-heavy death by PowerPoint? Do people seem to enjoy your presentations? Like, are they actually engaged throughout and tell you things like, that's the best presentation I've ever seen, right? That's the type of evidence you should be looking for to confirm you're doing the right thing. And I would be really surprised if you've heard those multiple times across multiple people and multiple contexts if you're doing the status quo. In contrast, people who take my professional development training and then implement those strategies in their presentations get those kind of compliments all the time. They see an improvement in engagement. They are told by people, that's the best presentation I've ever seen. That was so engaging. And that was accessible. For example, Heidi, a PhD candidate, took the first course in my series, Fail-Proof Slide Design, only the first one, and still said, I got feedback from multiple people that my presentation was accessible, engaging, well-paced, and easy to follow. So it's totally fair that you ask this of me for evidence, and it is coming next. And likewise, it's only fair that it's a question you ask yourself as well. Okay, so I think we're at a good stopping point. I'm trying to stop making such long YouTube videos, and it feels right to end with a reflection question before we pick things up in the next video. So to recap, the status quo is inaccessible, like really, really inaccessible. And this video was maybe a wake-up call to all of that. And we're going to keep going with this topic in part 2. Because I know you have more questions like, but my template is accessible, isn't it? And I didn't talk about that in this video because I talk about that and more in the next video. Like I said earlier, this is a complex, nuanced topic. It is going to take multiple videos to cover this adequately. So make sure that you watch the other videos for more detail, more nuance, and more examples. This video was just one small piece of everything I want to share with you. And also make sure you checked the description box because I have shared links with you below. So stay tuned and please let me know what questions you have about accessibility in presentations by leaving a comment below. And by the way, this whole video was just a PowerPoint presentation. I just use a Microsoft 365 subscription for home and office. That's it. No fancy software required. And that's why I say that death by PowerPoint, inaccessible, boring, status quo presentations, that's not PowerPoint's fault. Inaccessible presentations happen because we don't really get trained to create accessible presentations. Grad schools don't really train us on this. That's why I have an online professional development program to fill that gap. And I teach you how to create accessible, visually engaging presentations in that program. So if you are interested, definitely check out the link below. Alrighty, that is it for this video. I hope that you found it helpful, and if so, be sure to hit like, subscribe, and click the bell so you get notified when the next video in the series comes out. And if you know someone who is curious about whether or not the status quo is accessible, be sure to share this video with them. Alright, I will see you in the next video. Bye!